Hey guys, tonight we walk down a staircase that isn't really a staircase, more like a story shaped like steps. Cool stone under your feet, air getting slightly denser the lower you go. Torchlight making the walls breathe. You can almost taste the dust. That ancient library kind of dust, like baked clay and old reeds. The scent of something written down and then forgotten for a few thousand years. And we're doing it gently. No jump scares, no doom and gloom or panic, just you, me. And a myth that keeps showing up in human history like a recurring dream you can't quite shake. Some parts of tonight are widely accepted history, what most historians agree that ancient peoples actually wrote, built, and believed. Some parts are interpretation, what a careful reading might suggest, when you compare stories and notice patterns. And some parts are calm, what-if imagination. The cinematic mood where you let a lantern swing and wonder what it would feel like if the old symbols were suddenly real. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. We'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. Also, quick reality check. You probably won't survive this. Emotionally. Not because it's scary, but because you're going to realize humans have been telling the same sad, beautiful story since forever. And your brain is going to do that thing where it thinks about your entire life at 2 Very rude of it, honestly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and your local time, because I love imagining this story drifting through different bedrooms and different night skies, like a soft radio signal moving around the planet. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the top of the steps and look down. The first thing you notice is how normal it seems. Not dramatic, not flaming, not the kind of place a movie would insist is evil. Just a stairway disappearing into a darkness that feels organized. Like a corridor in a very old building where someone still cares about rules. Most historians agree that many ancient cultures told descent to the underworld myths, stories where someone living, or living-ish, goes down into the realm of the dead and then, sometimes, comes back. That's the mainstream anchor for tonight. The descent motif isn't a one-off curiosity. It appears again and again, across time and geography, like humans everywhere, decided. Yes, this is the shape of the thing we're afraid of, and also the thing we need, and you. Tonight, are stepping into that shape. You take the first step. The stone is cool. The air shifts, somewhere above. The everyday world continues. Someone laughing too loudly in a street. A dog turning in a circle before it lies down. The refrigerator humming with the confidence of a creature that has never once contemplated mortality. But down here, the sound gets softer, like your ears are being wrapped in felt. One interpretation is that descent myths mirror real ritual life and social anxieties. That's not a claim carved into a tablet in bold letters. It's a way scholars sometimes frame it. When communities face uncertainty, death, drought, war, disease, the loss of a king, the fear that the seasons might not return, stories become a container. A descent myth can hold all the frightening questions and give them a path. A sequence, a this happens, then this happens. Which is basically what humans crave when the universe is doing freestyle jazz. You keep going. The steps are narrow but not dangerous. The walls, if you run your fingertips along them, feel slightly uneven, as if they were formed by hands rather than machines. And as you descend, you start to notice something else. You are not alone. Not in a spooky way. More like You can sense the presence of all the other feet that have walked this staircase in story and in imagination. Because the underworld isn't only a place in ancient belief. It's a metaphor humans keep reusing over and over whenever we need language for the parts of life that feel like going down. Grief, depression, illness, heartbreak, exile, failure, shame, the quiet months when nothing grows. The descent myth takes those experiences and says, softly, yes, this is part of being alive. The torchlight in your hand, don't ask where you got it. Myths are generous like that, throws a warm circle on the steps. Outside that circle, everything is shadow. And that's kind of the point. Here's the trick about descent myths. They often begin with a boundary, a threshold, a door, a cave, a river, a crack in the earth. It's the moment when the hero, or goddess, or poet, or random guy who made a bad deal, crosses from the ordinary world into the other one. And crossing a boundary is what stories do best. If you can step across a line in narrative, you can step across a line in your mind. You take another step and think, okay, what is the underworld? Really, to the people who first told these stories, what's broadly accepted is that ancient underworlds weren't always places of punishment. That idea becomes very vivid in some traditions. But across many early cultures, the realm of the dead can be more like a distant city. Grey, dusty, ruled, inevitable. Sometimes it's a place of shadowy existence rather than moral torture. Sometimes it's simply where everyone goes, kings and peasants alike, which is honestly the most equal opportunity policy the ancient world ever invented. And when you think about it, that makes sense. If your worldview is shaped by fragile harvests and unpredictable floods, your focus might not be who deserves eternal reward, but how do we survive the fact that death exists at all? The underworld becomes a way to map the unknown. You reach a small landing. There's a pause, a breath, and you realize your mind is doing that thing where it wants a timeline, a neat explanation, a tidy chart. Sorry, brain. Tonight is myth, not a spreadsheet. But we can still lay some calm, solid stones. Most historians agree that written descent stories appear in ancient Mesopotamia among the earliest known literatures. That's not the only origin. Oral stories existed long before writing, but it's where we can see the motif with clarity because people pressed it into clay. They made the idea physical. And that act, taking a story about going down and literally stamping it into earth, feels almost poetic, doesn't it? Like the medium is already part of the message. Down into clay, down into the ground, down into memory. You keep walking. The torchlight flickers, and for a moment you imagine the walls are lined with tablets, each one like a frozen whisper. And in a sense, they are. The earliest myth-makers weren't trying to write fiction the way we think of it. They were shaping meaning. They were explaining why things hurt, why seasons change, why power shifts, why people vanish and don't come back. This is where the truth ladder matters. Documented. People in ancient Mesopotamia wrote myths about the underworld, including famous descent narratives, interpreted. These myths may reflect ritual patterns, political structures, and psychological needs. Imagined. What if you could walk down their staircase tonight and feel your own worries soften as the story gives them a place to sit? Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. You pass a carved symbol on the wall. You can't quite make it out. A rosette? A star? A flower? It's the kind of thing archaeologists might argue about for years, while the rest of us just go. Pretty, and this is where I slip you a small joke. Because we're keeping it human. If you ever feel unproductive, Remember, there are entire careers built around debating whether an ancient scratch mark is a star or a fancy flower. Your laundry can wait. As you descend, the air cools further. Your breath looks faintly visible now, which is weird because underworlds are supposed to be hot, right? That's your modern expectation talking. Many ancient underworlds are cold, dusty, subterranean. The dead are often described as eating dust, drinking muddy water, or simply existing in a kind of muted state. It's not fire, it's absence. It's the dim version of life. And here's a thought, that's arguably scarier than flames. Not in a horror way, tonight isn't horror, but in a deeply human way. The fear that you might be forgotten, that the lights might go out, that your voice might fade. One interpretation is that descent myths are also about memory, about refusing to let the dead be completely lost. If you tell a story where someone goes down and returns, you're creating a bridge between the living and the dead, a narrative rope. Even if nobody actually climbs it, it's there, and that can be comforting. We can reach you, the story says. We can imagine the path. You reach another landing, and there's a faint sound. Water? Not rushing. Just a slow, distant drip. In many traditions, rivers mark the boundary of the underworld. Some myths have a ferryman. Some have a crossing. Some have a pool. Some have a subterranean sea. Water is the perfect symbol for the boundary because it moves. It reflects. It hides depth. And that brings us to an important cross-cultural piece. The descent myth is not one story, but a family of stories. In some, a god descends and returns, bringing fertility. In others, a mortal goes down seeking knowledge or a loved one. In others, someone is taken and the world above suffers until they return. The details shift, but the skeleton remains. Down, encounter, transformation, return or not. Historians still argue whether these similarities come from cultural contact, trade routes, shared ideas, migrations, or whether they arise independently because human brains are basically running the same emotional operating system. There's no full consensus, and that's okay. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. You continue down. The staircase begins to curve. That's clever, because a curve makes you lose sight of the entrance. You can't see the world above anymore. That's how it works in these stories. Once you commit, you're committed. Descent myths don't usually let you hover halfway like you're checking your phone for directions. And as the curve tightens, you feel something subtle, a shift in your posture. You're quieter now, more careful, not scared, just respectful. The underworld, in myth, is a place with rules. It's not chaos. It's a kingdom of its own, with gates and laws and officials. That's a very mainstream observation. Many ancient texts describe the underworld as structured. A careful reading might suggest that this structure is a mirror of society. Think about it. If you live in a world of city-states, kings, courts, scribes, taxes, and temple bureaucracy, your afterlife might look like a city-state with kings, courts, scribes, taxes, and temple bureaucracy. Congratulations, you died. Please fill out Form 7B, and yes, you still need a stamp. That joke is not just a joke. It's a way of noticing how humans project the known onto the unknown. The underworld becomes an administrative space because the living world is administrative. The cosmos becomes a palace because palaces are the highest orders people can imagine. And in that projection, you can learn what a culture values and fears. You take another step and your torchlight reveals a doorway set into the stone. It's closed. No handle. Just a seam. This is the kind of moment where you might expect a monster. But descent myths often give you something subtler. A guard, a gate, a demand, a requirement. You can't go down without surrendering something. Your pride, your weapons, your status, your certainty. Tonight, we're not sprinting into the most famous version yet. That's coming. For now, we're letting the motif settle in your bones, because even before you meet any gods or judges, the descent myth is already doing its work. It's making you practice letting go. You touch the seam of the door. It's cold. And you think about how these stories probably sounded when they were first told out loud. Imagine a room lit by oil lamps, people leaning in, the storyteller's voice dropping as the hero approaches the underworld. The group breathed together. Everyone knows this part matters. Everyone has lost someone. Everyone will lose someone. The descent myth is entertainment, yes, but it's also communal processing. It's therapy with poetry. And yes, that's interpretation. We don't have a clay tablet that says, "This is for emotional processing, besties." But the way myths function, repeated, shared, performed, suggests they were more than idle tales. You pull your hand back from the door, and you keep descending, because the staircase continues. The door might be for later, or it might be one of those symbolic doors where the point is noticing it, not opening it. As you walk, you begin to notice small details. Faint scratches on the wall like tally marks, a chipped corner where someone once bumped a heavy object, a little soot stain on the ceiling. They make the place feel used, inhabited. And that's the other thing. Underworlds aren't just for the dead. They're for the living mind. They're places you visit in story, which means they're places you can survive. And that's a comforting thought to carry into sleep. You can go down in imagination and still come back. Now, if we're being honest, some descent myths end without return. Some end with loss. Some end with compromise. And that, too, is part of life. Not every descent has a tidy resolution, but even those stories offer something. They tell you you're not alone in the pattern. They let you name the experience. You reach another landing, and this one opens into a wider chamber. Your torchlight reveals a floor of smooth stone and a wall carved with faint lines. Like a map or a relief. You can't decipher it fully, but you sense it's depicting movement. A figure going down. A figure standing before something. A figure rising. What if the story is pointing at something else? Not a literal underground kingdom, but a psychological journey. A cycle of loss and renewal. A social ritual. A political parable. A meditation on the seasons. The beauty of the descent myth is that it can be all of these without collapsing into nonsense, as long as we keep the solid ground separate from the mist. Most historians agree that myths are layered. They can preserve older beliefs, then get reinterpreted by later scribes, then get reshaped by new empires, then survive as fragments, then get translated, then get misunderstood, then get reimagined again. A descent myth is like a stone that has been handled by many hands, worn smooth in places, chipped in others, still recognizable. And you, tonight, are one more hand on the stone. You sit on the edge of the chamber for a moment. You let your torch rest. You listen to the drip of distant water. Above, the world continues to be loud and bright and certain. Down here, the uncertainty feels softer, like it's allowed. And you think about why humans would invent a story where someone goes into the realm of death. It's not exactly a cheerful vacation itinerary, but it's also brave. It's an imaginative refusal to let death be a blank wall. If you can tell a story about what's behind the wall, even if it's metaphor, even if it's theory, even if it's a poetic guess, you've made the wall less absolute. That's a possibility, not a certainty. But it's a gentle one. You stand again. The staircase continues onward, deeper, curving toward the heart of the myth family we're about to explore. You lift your torch. The flame steadies, as if it likes the idea of going further. And as you take the next step, you feel the first true shift into the oldest known descent tradition, one where a great figure chooses to go down, where gates will demand surrender, where rules will tighten like a woven net. Not yet, not all at once. Just the sense that the next stretch of stairs leads into a story with a name. You inhale slowly. You exhale. Your shoulders drop. And you keep going, one calm step at a time. You keep descending, and the staircase narrows the way a thought narrows when you're finally honest with yourself. The torch in your hand makes a small, warm circle, and everything outside that circle feels patient, like it's been waiting for you since before you were born. Your footsteps land softly. Stone, stone, stone. Each one a reminder that you're moving through a story that has been told in different voices for a very long time. Ahead, the corridor opens into a gate, not a modern gate with hinges and squeaky metal. This one feels like a boundary drawn into reality. Two upright stones, a lintel above, and a darkness beyond that seems thicker than ordinary shadow, as if it has weight. You slow down without deciding to, because your body understands rules even when your mind pretends it doesn't. What's broadly accepted is that Mesopotamian tradition preserves a famous descent tale. In later retellings, translations, and scholarly reconstructions, you often meet it as the story of Inanna, also called Ishtar in Akkadian contexts, going down into the underworld. The evidence we do have points to versions of this narrative in Sumerian and Akkadian literature, clay tablets that preserve scenes, speeches, and that distinctive rhythm of formal myth. It's not one single original script we can hold up like a certificate. It's more like a braid of texts, some older, some later, with gaps and overlaps. Still, most historians agree the descent story is among the best-known underworld journeys in the ancient Near East. And now, in this soft, night story way, you're stepping toward it. One interpretation is that this descent encodes political power and seasonal change. You'll hear scholars suggest that Inanna's journey isn't just a supernatural drama. It may also mirror how authority worked, how ritual worked, how communities made sense of fertility and scarcity. But let me rephrase that more carefully. That's a possibility, not a certainty. Myths can carry multiple meanings at once without needing a single, correct decoding. They can be political and personal, cosmic and intimate, like a dream that speaks in metaphors, but still hits you right in the feelings. You approach the gate and notice something unsettlingly practical about it. A list. It's not written in English. Obviously, don't worry. Your myth translator brain is on. But the vibe is clear. Rules of entry. A procedure, like the underworld is a venue with a strict dress code and absolutely no exceptions. Not even if you're a goddess. Which, honestly, is a refreshing kind of equality. You step closer, and the darkness beyond the lintel seems to watch you. That's your imagination, of course. But myths are made of that sensation, the feeling of being seen by something older than you. In the descent tradition, the underworld has a queen, Ereshkigal. The name itself feels like a stone in the mouth. Heavy, ancient, not interested in your excuses. Inanna, by contrast, is often presented as brilliant, ambitious, associated with love, fertility, and also war and power. She's not a soft, harmless figure. She's the kind of divine personality who would absolutely reorganize your entire life and then call it growth. And that makes her descent fascinating. She isn't dragged down as punishment in the simplest reading. She goes, you pause, and let that sink in. A figure with agency choosing to enter the realm no one wants to enter. It's like walking voluntarily into winter, or voluntarily into grief, or voluntarily into the part of your own mind you usually avoid. In modern terms, you could call it shadow work, but the ancient version is less self-help and more cosmic bureaucracy with ominous poetry. You step through the gate. The air changes instantly. It smells less like dust and more like mineral earth, like wet stone in a cave. The torch flame leans, as if the underworld has its own draft, its own breath. The corridor beyond is lined with carved reliefs that suggest figures standing with hands raised, maybe greeting, maybe pleading, maybe just stuck in eternal awkwardness. If you've ever been in a group photo where nobody knows what to do with their arms, congratulations. You understand a small part of the underworld aesthetic. You walk forward and hear a voice. Calm, flat, trained by repetition. State your name. State your purpose. The voice isn't threatening. That's what makes it unsettling. It sounds like a clerk at a counter, like a guard who has heard every story and is bored by all of them. You answer because in myth, you answer. And as you answer, you feel the story aligning itself around you. You're not just wandering a spooky hallway. You're entering a narrative machine designed to strip you down to essentials. Most historians agree that the Sumerian city-states had complex temple economies and ritual life. And deities weren't just beliefs. They were woven into governance, identity, agriculture, and law. So a myth about a goddess descending isn't merely a fantasy. It's also a story that could have resonated with how people experienced power, status, and vulnerability. When a goddess kneels before the underworld's rules, it echoes how even the mighty must sometimes submit to systems larger than themselves. One interpretation is that Inanna's descent dramatizes a transfer of power. She goes down perhaps to extend her domain, or to confront her counterpart, or to attend a funeral rite in some versions. The texts are debated in detail, and scholars continue to debate what the best reading is. Because myth isn't a legal contract, the evidence doesn't always give us a single intention. It gives us scenes, motifs, and a worldview in fragments. Historians still argue whether the descent is primarily a seasonal myth, explaining cycles of fertility and barrenness, or primarily a political theological statement about divine authority and boundaries. Some readings lean toward the agricultural rhythm, descent as winter, return as spring. Others emphasize the social structure, who rules what, and what happens when boundaries are crossed. And there are also psychological readings, which see the underworld as an interior landscape. We're not proving anything tonight. We're following clues. You walk deeper, and the corridor's walls become smoother, as if the stone has been polished by centuries of passing. Your torchlight catches on a symbol repeated every few paces, a rosette-like emblem. It could suggest Inanna's identity. She's often associated with a star, with Venus, with radiance. Archaeology suggests that iconography, stars, rosettes, lions, was used to represent divine presence and authority in Mesopotamian art. That's mainstream ground. Symbols mattered, and they were repeated with intention. Now, the cinematic what-if mood slips in, gently. What if the symbol isn't just decoration? What if it's a key, a signal, a passcode? What if the underworld's architecture recognizes divine insignia the way a modern scanner recognizes a badge? You reach another threshold, and this one is guarded. The guard is not a monster. Again, the underworld is annoyingly administrative. The guard is a figure with a rigid posture and eyes that reflect torchlight like dark glass. He holds a staff, not for fighting, but for signaling. He looks at you with the same expression a security guard gives when you try to bring a drink into a concert venue. No one enters without the rules, he says. You nod, because even gods nod to rules down here. And this is where the story's logic begins to reveal itself. Descent isn't just movement. It's exchange. The guard gestures to a ledge beside the gate. On it, you see objects laid out as if for inspection. A crown, a necklace, a ring, a robe, maybe even sandals. Not random items. Symbols of status, identity, power. You recognize this is not your inventory screen. It's your identity being itemized. In the famous telling, Inanna approaches the underworld wearing her divine regalia. She is a queen of heaven, and she arrives adorned. But at each gate, 7 gates in many versions, she is required to remove something. The story is explicit about stripping, a crown at one gate, jewelry at another, garments at another. It is a staged unmaking. We'll go gate by gate in the next section, but for now, you feel the first pull. The underworld demands you arrive less than you were. A careful reading might suggest this reflects how status is conditional. Above ground, you can be important, admired, feared. Below ground, everyone is reduced. Death is the great equalizer, an idea that appears in many cultures in different forms. And the ritual stripping might mirror real practices. Mourners changing clothes, priests removing ornaments, initiates surrendering symbols of identity. That's interpretation, not certainty, but it fits how ritual often uses clothing and objects to mark transformation. The guard speaks again, and you feel the story's voice settle into your bones. Why have you come? You could answer with the myth's reasons. In some versions, Inanna goes to attend funeral rites for Ereshkigal's husband. In others, the motivation is less clear and more like a bold divine move. She wants to extend her influence into the underworld itself. The texts vary, and again, we keep the solid ground separate from the mist. What's broadly accepted is that she goes down. Why she goes down can be read multiple ways. You give a careful answer, the kind that would satisfy a cosmic clerk. I come to understand. I come to cross. I come because the story brings me. The guard nods, as if that's filed under acceptable categories. He gestures. Then surrender what you carry. You look down at your own hands, and here the story becomes more personal. Because even if you aren't wearing a literal crown, you are wearing things, ideas about yourself, roles, titles, defenses, little narratives you cling to. The underworld doesn't care about your LinkedIn headline. And yes, I'm saying that in the kindest way possible. You remove something symbolic. Maybe a ring you imagine on your finger, representing commitment to how you've always been. You set it on the ledge. The moment it leaves your hand, you feel lighter and strangely exposed, like stepping outside without your phone. You know you'll survive, but your thumb still twitches like it wants to scroll. That's one of tonight's 3 gentle jokes. By the way, in the underworld, there's no Wi-Fi. Not because it's evil, because the dead simply refuse to reset the router. You pass through. The corridor beyond is wider, and the ceiling is lower. The sound of your footsteps changes. Less echo, more thud. You're deeper now. Your torchlight flickers, and you catch glimpses of shapes carved into pillars, lions, stars, perhaps a figure standing with wings or a cloak. Iconography shifts between the earthly and the divine, between power and mystery. The narrative around Inanna also carries a tension. She is associated with love and fertility, but also with conflict and conquest. She isn't just the goddess of romance. She's the goddess who can make kings tremble. That duality matters, because it frames the descent, not as a delicate fainting spell, but as a confrontation with the ultimate boundary. One interpretation is that the myth explores what happens when force meets inevitability. Above ground, power can dominate. Below ground, power must negotiate. The underworld is the one realm that doesn't flatter. You move on, and you feel a pull behind you, like a memory of the gate closing in many underworld myths. Once the gate shuts, you can't simply change your mind. That's part of their emotional impact. Commitment. The descent is irreversible, at least for a while. A quiet thought drifts through you. Maybe that's why these stories endure. Because grief feels like a gate closing. Because illness feels like a boundary crossing. Because change feels like leaving your old self on a ledge and walking forward without it. You reach a small chamber where the air is colder still. A figure sits there, another official, another attendant. He doesn't look up until you stop. Name? He says. You give it again. Purpose? You answer again. He nods. Then marks something. Maybe on a tablet, maybe in the air. And you realize something. The underworld isn't chaotic. It's orderly. It has procedures that is both comforting and unnerving. Comforting, because order means you can navigate. Unnerving, because order means you can be processed. And here's where the cinematic what if slips in. What if every step you take is being recorded somewhere? Not in a surveillance way, but in a cosmic accounting of transitions. What if myths are the record of human crossings, stored like a library of emotional maps? You continue, and as you do, you catch a distant sound, faint, rhythmic, like drums, or like a heartbeat. It could be the echo of your own blood in your ears. It could be the underworld's pulse. Some parts are gentle imagination, and this is one of them, the notion that the underworld has its own life, its own rhythm, a slow tide beneath the world. You walk until the corridor bends and you see another gate ahead. It is larger. The stone is darker. The seam is sharper, like it was cut by a more serious hand. And beside it stands a sign, not a literal sign in modern terms, but a carved warning. Nothing enters whole. You swallow, because you know what's next. You know the story is about stripping, surrender, and transformation. And you also know that you're doing this in the safest way possible, through narrative, through symbol, through the soft permission of bedtime history. Most historians agree that the endurance of myths like Inanna's descent comes from their adaptability. They can be recited in temples, whispered in homes, copied by scribes, translated by scholars, and then retold by someone like me to someone like you, thousands of years later, while you're half under a blanket and hoping your brain will stop replaying that awkward thing you said in 2017. And now the underworld clerk, yes, there's always another one, raises his hand. Before the next gate, he says. You will surrender again. You glance down at yourself and feel the space where the ring used to be. It's not painful. It's just open, like a small window that lets cold air in. You realize that the myth isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to change your shape, and you step forward toward the next gate, knowing that each step is a lesson in letting go, and that the story will keep you steady as it takes things away. Not all at once, not cruelly, just one quiet surrender at a time. You step up to the next gate, and it looks like it's been waiting for you specifically, like it already knows the shape of your shoulders, the weight of your thoughts, the little habits you bring with you everywhere. The stone is darker here, almost glossy in the torchlight, as if countless hands have brushed it in passing. The seam down the middle is so straight it feels unnatural, like an idea cut into rock. The guard beside it doesn't glare. He doesn't threaten. He just holds out an open palm the way a cashier holds out a hand for payment. That's the underworld's personality. Calm, procedural, absolutely unimpressed by your resume. Archaeology suggests that gate symbolism repeats across temples and texts, thresholds, doorways, guarded entries, passages marked by posts and lintels, sometimes even depicted in reliefs that emphasize crossing and transformation. That's solid ground. Ancient people cared about boundaries, and they built them into both architecture and story. A gate is never only a gate. It's a decision, a shift, a moment that changes what you are allowed to be. One interpretation is that each gate in the descent tradition represents a staged surrender of status, not a random stripping, but a sequence. Like the story is teaching you that letting go is rarely one dramatic act. It's usually many smaller releases, each one its own quiet ache. The guard speaks, voice steady as a metronome. Remove what you carry. You glance at the ledge again. It's longer now, as if it expects a collection. You feel a faint sting of annoyance, because you're human. And humans are like that, even in a sacred mythic underworld. You still think, really? Again? But you comply, because myths reward cooperation and punish improvisation. You set down another symbol. Maybe it's a necklace that, in your mind, represents the stories you tell about yourself, the ones that sparkle, the ones you like people to notice. You unclasp it, and for a moment your fingers fumble, because of course they do, even in the underworld. You can't get jewelry off smoothly. Somewhere a Sumerian scribe is laughing quietly. Like, yes, exactly. The gate opens with a sound that is not a creak, not a groan, but a clean click, as if a latch has been released with precision. And in that click, you feel the tiniest pressure change in the air, like the underworld exhaled and decided you were acceptable. You walk through. The corridor beyond is narrower, and the torchlight feels smaller, like it's being politely discouraged. You notice how the darkness isn't empty. It's full of silence, full of waiting, full of rules. Ahead, you see another gate. This is the rhythm now. Approach, surrender, pass. In the most familiar version of the Inanna descent, there are 7 gates. 7 is a number that shows up a lot in ancient traditions, sometimes tied to planets visible to the naked eye, sometimes to ceremonial completeness, sometimes simply because it feels right in the mouth of a storyteller. We should be careful, though. Not every appearance of 7 means the same thing, and not every symbolic interpretation is secure. Still, the pattern is there, repeated enough that it shapes how the story is remembered. You reach gate 3. The guard is different, but the expression is the same. Neutral, almost bored. He gestures to the ledge. Remove what you carry. This time, you imagine a robe, something that signals authority, belonging. I'm allowed to be here. You slide it off your shoulders and fold it neatly. Because you're trying to be respectful, and also because you're the kind of person who can't put anything down without aligning the edges. Yes, that's a joke about you. It's affectionate. The underworld notices your neat folds and remains emotionally unavailable. As the fabric leaves your skin, you feel the chill more directly. That's the point. The story is stripping away insulation. Not only physical insulation, but the layers of identity that keep you warm in daily life. The latch clicks. You pass through. Gate 4 arrives like a thought you didn't invite. The seam in the stone looks sharper, the carvings more severe. The guard's palm is already out. Remove what you carry. You hesitate. Not because you can't, but because you're starting to realize what the myth is doing. It's making surrender feel repetitive. And repetition is where meaning sinks in. You remove a ring, maybe another symbol of connection, and as you set it down, you feel something in your chest loosen and tighten at the same time. That's the paradox of letting go. It frees you, and it also exposes the tender place underneath. Click, gate 5. The corridor between gates is shorter now, like the underworld is speeding up the process. Less time to think. Less time to bargain with yourself. The guard says the same words with the same tone, and you almost laugh. Because it's so consistent, it's absurd. You remove earrings, small, shining things that represent listening, attention, the desire to be heard. You set them down, and you realize the underworld isn't asking you to stop being you. It's asking you to stop needing to be perceived a certain way. Click. Gate 6. By now, your arms feel strangely light, like you've been carrying invisible bags all your life and only just noticed the weight. You come to the ledge and remove a crown, if you're following Inanna's famous list, or whatever symbol of I'm in charge your own mind supplies. The moment it leaves your head, you feel a faint dizziness, as if your body had been balancing something without telling you, and you think, with a sleepy sort of humor, so this is what it's like when your ego gets uninstalled. No warning, no tutorial, just click and suddenly you're running on a simpler operating system. Click. Gate 7, the last threshold, is the quietest. The stone looks almost smooth, as if it's been worn down by time and compliance. The guard says nothing at first. He just looks at you the way a mirror looks at you, without judgment, without comfort, without flinching. Then, softly, remove what you carry, in the myth's most vivid telling. This is where the final garment is taken, leaving Inanna naked before the underworld. That image can feel startling, but it's not presented as sensational. It's presented as absolute. Down here, you stand without symbols, without armor, without titles, without adornment. The story doesn't treat this as shame. It treats it as the necessary condition of entry. A careful reading might suggest that the gates are not punishments but stages, like a ritual, like a slow descent into truth. Each removal is a lesson. Power is temporary. Beauty is temporary. Status is temporary. Even your favorite story about yourself is temporary. And while that sounds heavy, it's also oddly calming, because if everything is temporary, then your current worry, yes, that one, also has an expiration date. You set down the last thing. You feel the air against your skin. You feel the torch's warmth on your face. You feel your own breathing, steady, real. A small proof of life. The latch clicks one final time, crisp as a snapped thread, and you step through. Beyond the 7th gate, the corridor opens into a space so wide your torchlight can't find the walls. The ceiling is lost in darkness. The floor is smooth, almost polished, and your footsteps sound too loud, like you're walking in a museum after closing hours. Your torch seems suddenly inappropriate, like bringing a flashlight into a room where the room itself is a kind of knowledge. This is the underworld proper. Most historians agree that Mesopotamian underworld descriptions often emphasize inevitability and hierarchy, a realm with its own rulers, its own officials, its own laws, not chaotic, not random, structured. The dead are frequently imagined as existing in a dim state, and the underworld is not easily escaped. That's the broad, accepted picture we can trace through texts and later comparisons. And now you feel the story's deepest intention. The gates weren't just obstacles. They were preparation. They were the training wheels for confronting what comes next. Because in the Inanna tradition, the underworld is ruled by Ereshkigal, and she is not merely a villain. She's a sovereign of a necessary realm. If Inanna is the bright star, the visible planet, the public face of desire and power, then Ereshkigal is the deep earth, the hidden foundation, the part of existence that doesn't ask permission. You take a few steps forward, and you sense a presence, not a jump-scare presence, a gravity presence, like stepping near a large body of water at night and knowing it could swallow sound. There's a throne-like shape in the distance, implied more than seen. The torchlight doesn't reach far enough to confirm details, and that feels appropriate. The underworld isn't eager to show itself fully. You hear a sound like a low breath, then another, as if the room itself is alive. Or maybe it's just your own ears amplifying the silence. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. A fringe idea proposes that the 7 gates might encode astronomical knowledge, layers of sky, planetary stations, or a symbolic journey through celestial zones. This theory isn't widely accepted, and evidence for a precise one-to-one mapping is thin, but it's a popular modern speculation because ancient Mesopotamians did observe the heavens carefully and tracked planetary movements with real sophistication. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a fun lens. What if each latch click is not only a ritual surrender, but also a step through a cosmic diagram, downward in story? But mirroring a chart of the sky? But we'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. The grounded view is strong enough on its own. The gates strip you. The stripping changes you. Historians still argue whether the 7-gate sequence reflects a real temple or ritual pattern, something enacted by priests or initiates, or whether it's primarily a literary device designed to build tension and meaning. There's no full consensus, and that's part of what keeps the myth alive. It's both theatrical and intimate, both public and psychological. You stand in the open space and feel your own smallness, not in a humiliating way, more in a quiet, natural way, like looking up at a night sky and realizing you are one warm dot among many. The underworld makes you simple again. It returns you to basics. And in that simplicity, you notice the emotional trick of the story. When you have nothing, you can't bargain, you can't distract, you can't perform, you can only be. You take another step, and now you can make out movement in the darkness. Figures, perhaps, or shadows of figures. Officials, witnesses. The underworld doesn't do things privately. It is, in its own way, a courtroom, a palace, an archive. You almost smile, because your mind flashes a modern comparison. The underworld is like customer support, but cosmic. You've been escalated to a higher tier, and unfortunately the hold music is just your own heartbeat. That's joke number 2. Here's joke number 3, because your brain deserves snacks. If you're ever worried you're too much, remember Inanna shows up to the underworld in full regalia, like she's going to a gala, and the underworld is like, cute, take it off. So yes, even divinity gets humbled by a dress code. You breathe in, slow. You breathe out, slower. A subtle feeling arises. The gates weren't just taking objects. They were taking certainty. They were removing the things that make you feel separate from everyone else. In the underworld, separation dissolves. Not in a scary way, more like how nighttime dissolves the sharp edges of a room. And that's where the latch clicks become almost soothing. Click, release, click, release. Like a metronome guiding you away from the noisy world above. You glance back, half expecting to see the gates lined up behind you like a long spine of stone, but the darkness swallows the corridor. You can't see the path you took. That's another underworld rule. Once you're in, you're in. You look forward again, toward the implied throne, toward the presence that feels like deep earth. The next thing that happens in the famous descent story is not gentle. It's not gore, not horror, but it's intense. It involves judgment, consequence, the weight of cosmic law, and we'll handle it carefully, sleep-friendly, without turning it into a panic spiral. For now, you stand in the wide chamber, stripped of symbols, and you let yourself feel the paradox. You are more vulnerable, and you are also more free. You have nothing to protect, and therefore nothing to lose, except the story itself. The torchlight steadies, as if it, too, is listening. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, the underworld's queen prepares to acknowledge you, not as a visitor, not as a guest, but as someone who has crossed every threshold and arrived exactly as required. You walk farther into the wide chamber, and the space begins to feel less like a cave and more like a hall built for decisions. The floor under your feet is so smooth it reflects a faint, trembling ribbon of torchlight. The air smells of stone and something metallic, like rainwater that has been sitting in a basin. A sound rises. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. It is the scrape of something being moved across the floor, then the soft tap of a staff. The underworld does not rush. It organizes. In the distance, shapes resolve into a kind of court. Not a modern courtroom with polished wood and microphones, but a ritual court with seats that look carved into the dark itself. Figures sit there in stillness, their posture suggesting attention rather than menace. Their faces are hard to read, partly hidden by shadow, partly because they do not emote the way you want them to. Most historians agree that many ancient underworld stories present the realm of the dead as a place with rules, officials, and judgments. It is not simply a pit of chaos. It is closer to a kingdom or a city with its own administration. The idea of order beneath the earth shows up across texts and cultures, sometimes with judges, sometimes with gates, sometimes with records or decrees. That grounded structure is one of the most consistent features. The dead do not merely vanish. They relocate into a system. A figure steps forward. Robes falling in straight lines like water. The robe is not decorative. It looks functional, like clothing designed for someone who spends a long time standing still and listening to other people explain themselves. The figure raises a hand, palm outward, and you stop without thinking. Your body understands ritual even when your mind tries to treat everything like a casual conversation. A voice speaks, and it sounds like it comes from more than one mouth. Name? You say it. Your voice feels smaller than usual, as if the room is gently compressing sound. Purpose? You answer, and the answer is simple because the underworld does not like speeches. You keep your words clean, like placing stones in a line. The figure turns, and you see the outline of a second presence deeper in the shadows. This one feels heavier, as if the room tilts toward it. You do not need anyone to announce her. You can sense sovereignty the way you can sense a mountain. Ereshkigal. She does not glow. She does not sparkle. She does not perform. Her authority is the kind that does not need proof. Her throne is less a chair and more an inevitability. A place that exists because something must rule what everyone fears. A careful reading might suggest that this underworld court reflects ideas people lived with daily. In city life, there were courts, contracts, oaths, penalties, offices, even the gods. In some traditions, are depicted as participating in assemblies and legal decisions. If your world is governed by decrees, you might imagine the cosmos is governed by decrees as well. That is interpretation, not certainty. But it matches how ancient societies often projected familiar structures onto the divine. You step forward again, and the torchlight catches on faces at the edge of the hall. Some look like attendants. Some look like watchers. Some look like they have been waiting for a very long time, which is probably accurate in a realm where time does not behave like it does upstairs. A hush settles. Not the hush of fear, the hush of process. Then the court begins. Ereshkigal speaks, and her voice is low, controlled, and uncomfortably calm. You enter my realm. You arrive without your signs. You stand as you are. What do you seek? Her words do not sound like curiosity. They sound like the opening lines of a legal form. You realize something important. The underworld does not ask whether you are brave. It asks whether you are allowed. In the best-known tellings of the Mesopotamian descent tradition, the underworld is governed by laws that even gods cannot casually break. That is one reason the story carries weight. It treats the boundary between life and death as firm, not moralistic, just firm. You can feel it in the court's posture. This is not a place that negotiates on emotion. A figure near the throne raises a staff again, and you hear a sequence of soft taps, like punctuation marks. Another voice speaks, this one sharper. Let the rules be spoken. You do not see a scroll, but you feel the presence of rules the way you feel a change in temperature. The rules are simply there, carried by the court like a shared memory. And now the story tightens into something almost ceremonial. Like a lesson in slow motion, one interpretation is that this courtroom is a way of teaching limits. It says, power has a boundary. Desire has a boundary. Even divinity has a boundary. In a world where kings can be unpredictable and storms can erase crops overnight. A myth that insists on cosmic limits might be strangely comforting. It says there is at least one place where procedure matters, where nothing is random. You shift your weight and your bare skin prickles. You are aware of yourself in a way you usually avoid. No armor, no ornaments, no role to hide behind. You stand as a person, not a performance. Ereshkigal's gaze settles on you. It is not hateful. It is not warm. It is exact. Then she speaks again. You are living. Living things do not belong here. Yet you have crossed the gates. The gates have taken what you carried. Now the law must respond. Your heart beats a little louder, and you notice how the underworld does not react to it. Your heartbeat is your business. The court is not impressed by biology. A small joke drifts into your mind, and you almost smile despite yourself. This is the one courtroom where you cannot claim you forgot the appointment. Because the underworld has never once lost a calendar invite, the figure with the staff turns slightly, and a new presence steps forward. These are the judges, or at least the ones who feel like judges. In some Mesopotamian traditions, the underworld includes a council of judges, sometimes described as the Anuna or Anunnaki in certain contexts, though the terms can be complex across texts and later interpretations. Most historians agree that there are references to underworld judges in ancient literature, even if the details vary between versions and translations. The mainstream point is simple. Judgment is part of the mythic underworld structure. They look at you as if you are a problem to be categorized. A voice from the council speaks. By what right do you stand in the land of no return? The question lands like a stone placed on your chest. Not painful, just heavy with finality. You answer with the only thing you have left, which is honesty framed by myth. You speak of seeking understanding. You speak of crossing boundaries. You speak of the strange human need to name the unknown. The council listens. Then one of them tilts their head, and you realize they are not judging your sincerity. They are judging your status, living or dead. Bound by what law? Granted what exception? Historians still argue whether underworld judgment scenes reflect real legal procedures and temple rituals, or whether they are mainly poetic devices meant to express inevitability. The room feels colder when that debate settles in your mind, because it reminds you that even scholars, with all their careful notes, cannot fully pin down what a myth is doing. A myth can be law and art at the same time. Ereshkigal lifts a hand. Enough. The word is not angry. It is an ending. She looks at you and says, "You have come down. You have crossed. Then you will be treated according to the realm you entered, and you understand the underworld's rule in a more personal way. It is not punishing you for curiosity. It is enforcing a boundary that makes existence coherent. If the living could stroll in and out, death would become casual, and the world would lose its shape. The torch in your hand flickers, and for a moment you wonder if it will go out. The thought makes your throat tighten. Then, to keep you calm, your mind offers a second small joke, like a bedtime snack. Imagine trying to explain this situation to a customer service chatbot. Hello, I'm currently in the underworld. Yes, I have tried turning myself off and on again. No, it did not help. The council shifts, and the staff taps again. You feel a kind of pressure, not physical, more like a decision being made about you. The air becomes dense, like fog settling. In the famous descent story, this is the moment where consequences arrive. In some versions, the visitor is judged, struck down, or held fast by the underworld's law. It is intense, but it does not have to be violent in a graphic way. The myth's force is emotional, not gory. It is about the shock of realizing that boundaries are real. You feel your knees soften, your torch dips. The hall tilts slightly, as if gravity has changed its opinion. A careful reading might suggest that this moment represents a kind of ego death or symbolic death, a ritualized collapse that makes transformation possible. Again, that is interpretation, not a medical diagnosis and not a promise. It is simply one way to understand why the story insists the descent must cost something. If nothing is paid, nothing is learned. The torchlight dims. Your hearing becomes distant, as though the court is moving away from you, or you are moving away from the court. The figures blur at the edges. Ereshkigal's voice reaches you. Quieter now. Let the law hold. And it does. Your body does not slam to the ground in a dramatic way. It lowers, like a curtain dropping slowly. Your mind stays aware, which is the strangest part. You are present inside the fading, like someone sitting on the edge of sleep while the room dissolves. The underworld, it seems, has its own version of sleep. You lie on the smooth stone, and you feel how cold it is. But the cold is not cruel. It is impartial, like winter air. The torch slips from your hand and rolls a short distance, its flame still burning, still trying, still loyal. That little flame feels like the last stubborn piece of you that refuses to be fully absorbed. You stare at it, and the sight becomes symbolic in your mind. Even when you are reduced, even when you are held by forces you cannot negotiate with, something in you still glows. A fringe idea proposes that underworld courts and judges might preserve echoes of very ancient communal practices, like elders deciding disputes at thresholds, or funeral rituals where the living symbolically present the dead before a community. This theory is not widely accepted as a direct one-to-one match, and evidence is scattered, but it is suggestive in a human way. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it offers a gentle lens. What if the underworld court is partly a memory of human communities processing loss together, turning grief into procedure so it becomes survivable? You breathe shallowly now, not because you're panicking, but because the air feels heavy. Your eyes want to close, your mind wants to drift. The council's voices fade. Ereshkigal's presence remains, like deep earth beneath everything. And in the quiet that follows, you realize the court has done something important. It has not destroyed you. It has placed you inside a law that is older than your feelings. Oddly, that feels calming, because a law, even a strict one, is predictable. And predictability is what a tired mind craves at night. Your eyelids lower. The torch's flame becomes a soft smear of light. The whole ceiling disappears entirely. The underworld becomes not a room, not a court, not even a story, but a deep stillness holding you like a bowl. You let your breath slow. You let your hands relax against the stone, and you rest in the underworld's quiet, not as a victory, not as a defeat, but as a pause, a necessary still point where the story gathers itself for whatever comes next. You lie on the smooth stone, and the cold holds you the way a river holds a fallen leaf, not gripping, not pushing, just carrying. Your breath is shallow but steady, and your thoughts move like slow clouds. In the dim, you sense that the underworld is not finished with you. It is simply letting you become quiet enough to hear the next rule. A soft footstep approaches, careful and unhurried. A figure kneels beside you, not a judge, not a queen, but an attendant whose job is to notice small changes. The torchlight, still burning a short distance away, paints the figure's hands in amber as they hover near your face, checking whether you are awake, asleep, or somewhere in between. The figure speaks in a low voice, as if the underworld itself is resting. Living breath does not stay here without a price. The words do not sting, they settle. Most historians agree that substitution is a recurring motif in ancient myths, especially in stories about crossing boundaries between realms. In different cultures, someone returns from death or from the land of the dead. But the return is not free. The story often insists on exchange. Something is taken. Something is given. It is a narrative way of making balance feel real. You sit up slowly, palms against stone. Your skin prickles. Your mouth tastes like mineral dust, like you licked a rock as a child and instantly regretted it. You glance around and see the court is no longer in motion. The officials have withdrawn into shadow, as if judgment is complete and the realm has moved on to processing. A new presence arrives, and it feels different from the others. Not heavy like Ereshkigal, not sharp like the judges. This presence feels like urgency wrapped in loyalty. It is the kind of energy that belongs to a friend who will walk into trouble without asking for details first. A figure hurries toward you, feet whispering across the floor. The figure's face is tired, eyes bright with concern. They carry no weapon. They carry intention. In the Mesopotamian descent tradition, a loyal attendant is often part of the story, a figure who goes seeking help when the one who descended is held fast. Different versions name different helpers, but a commonly remembered one is Ninshubur, Inanna's trusted servant or messenger. What's broadly accepted is that many myths place a faithful companion outside the crisis, acting as the bridge between silence and rescue. The attendant kneels, touching your shoulder as if testing whether you are real. "You are still here," they whisper, relief and alarm mixing in the same breath. You nod, and the motion feels heavy, like nodding underwater. The attendant glances toward the darkness where the throne's weight can still be sensed, even when you cannot see it. Then they lean close and speak as if the words are a secret that might be confiscated. There is a way out. There is always a way out. But the law demands a replacement. That sentence changes the air. Suddenly, the underworld feels less like a place and more like an equation. One interpretation is that substitution myths help communities make sense of loss without needing a single villain. If suffering happens, the story says, it happens within a structure. It happens because existence has terms. That is not a happy idea, but it is a stabilizing one. It turns grief from a random attack into a rule you can name. You rise to your feet, slower than you want. Your legs wobble, and the attendant steadies you. The torchlight flickers as if it's listening too, trying to keep the scene warm. A sound comes from the darkness, A soft tap like a seal being pressed into clay. A voice speaks, not loud, not cruel. Let the living depart. If a living takes the place, the message lands with a chill that has nothing to do with temperature. It is the chill of realizing the story will not accept a clean escape. You look at the attendant, and they look back with a fierce tenderness. They do not try to lie to you. They do not say everything will be fine. They simply stay close, because loyalty is sometimes the only comfort allowed. You begin walking, guided by the attendant through corridors that seem to rearrange themselves as you move. Not magically in a flashy way. More like the underworld's paths obey a logic you do not fully understand. The torch's flame leans forward as if it wants to go too. Along the way, you pass niches in the walls where figures sit in stillness, heads bowed, hands folded, not screaming, not flailing, simply present in a dim routine. The underworld is not a carnival of horror. It is a city of muted persistence. Most historians agree that many ancient descriptions of the realm of the dead emphasize dullness and dust rather than theatrical torment. That difference matters. It frames death less as punishment and more as separation, a thinning of color and sound. It is one reason the exchange rule feels so sharp. If the underworld is a quiet, holding place, then sending someone there is not vengeance. It is a transfer into silence. You reach a doorway that seems to open on its own, not because you command it, but because the law has decided your movement is permitted. The threshold breathes cold air onto your face, and you step through. The corridor beyond is narrower and feels closer to the living world. You can smell a faint hint of reeds, or fresh water, or something that reminds your body of daylight. The attendant walks beside you, shoulders tight, like someone who knows the next conversation could break their heart. Then you see them, not a monster, not a judge, a person. A figure stands at a distance, and the sight of them is almost painfully ordinary. They have the posture of someone who believes they belong above ground. They hold themselves like a beloved spouse, a celebrated partner, a prosperous citizen. They look up as you approach, eyes widening with relief. "Where have you been?" they say, and the simplicity of it makes your throat tighten. In the traditional myth pattern, this figure is often identified as Dumuzi, associated in many sources with shepherd kingship and fertility, and sometimes linked with seasonal cycles. The evidence we do have points to Dumuzi being a significant figure in Sumerian literature, appearing across different compositions and later traditions. The mainstream anchor is clear. A named companion or spouse becomes entangled in the exchange demanded by the underworld. The person before you steps forward, reaching for you. Their hands are warm. Their touch feels like sunlight compared to stone. And then you notice something that makes your stomach drop. They are not dressed in mourning. Their face does not show the raw disarray you might expect if they had truly understood what happened to you. Their eyes are bright with concern. Yes, but their life looks uninterrupted. Their hair is neat. Their clothing is clean. They seem, in a quiet way, untouched by the underworld's weight. This is where the myth tightens into moral tension, but it does it with restraint. It does not scream at you. It invites you to notice. A careful reading might suggest that this moment is about empathy and responsibility. The underworld demands balance, but the story's emotional engine is the question of who pays, who bears the cost of survival. Who gets spared? Who gets chosen? A voice seems to rise from the corridor itself, like a whisper embedded in stone. Choose. You freeze. The person in front of you searches your face. Confused. "What is this?" they ask, and their voice cracks. The attendant beside you stiffens, eyes narrowing as if they can see the law moving around you like invisible threads. You feel the underworld watching. Not maliciously, clinically, like a scale waiting for weight. A small joke tries to push its way into your mind. the kind your brain uses to keep from panicking. You think, of course the underworld has a policy. Of course there is fine print. And you can almost imagine a clerk saying, "Thank you for visiting the realm of the dead. Please take a number. Refunds are not available." It is funny for half a second, then it is not. You look at the person who loves you, or who is supposed to love you, and you realize the myth is asking a question older than writing. If you can be saved only by sending someone else into silence, what do you do with that? Historians still argue whether this substitution scene is primarily a ritual reflection, possibly tied to seasonal festivals and symbolic transfers, or a literary moral drama about loyalty and neglect. There is no full consensus, and that uncertainty matters, because it means the myth remains a mirror. It changes based on who is looking. The person in front of you takes another step. Their hands tighten around yours. "Come home," they plead. The underworld's whisper repeats. Softer. Choose. Your mouth goes dry. Your mind races, but your body stays still. That is how myths trap you. They make you stand in one spot while your heart runs laps. The attendant beside you leans in, voice low. The law wants a living presence to remain. It does not care who. It cares that the exchange is real. A more cautious explanation could be that this part of the story offers a framework for explaining why good things can coexist with painful cost. Someone survives, someone suffers. The myth makes it symbolic so it can be spoken aloud without destroying the listener. It turns tragedy into structure. You look again at the beloved figure. You search for signs of grief, for disorder, for the kind of mess that proves someone has been crying. You do not see it. That absence hits you harder than any threat. And now the cinematic possibility enters, gentle but vivid. What if the underworld is not judging morality in a modern sense, but measuring resonance? What if it listens for who truly feels the weight of the descent? What if it chooses not by anger, but by the imbalance of care? You hear another sound, like wings in darkness. Shapes move at the edge of torchlight, not attacking. Arriving, they look like attendants of the law. Figures who enforce without hatred. Their hands are empty, because they do not need weapons. Procedure is their tool. The beloved figure notices them and recoils. What are they? They whisper. You cannot answer easily. You want to protect them, but you also want the story to be fair. Your chest aches with the impossible. A second joke bubbles up, small and bittersweet. It is amazing how fast people ask questions when the consequences show up in person. Humans really do love ignoring risk until risk introduces itself with eye contact. You squeeze the beloved's hands. Your voice comes out soft. There is a cost. Their eyes widen. They shake their head. No, there has to be another way. The attendant beside you looks away, jaw tight, as if they have already begged the cosmos and received silence. The law figures step closer. Their presence cools the air. The beloved figure looks at you again, and now you see fear finally breaking through their neat composure. Their life has been uninterrupted because they believed it could be. The myth is exposing that belief. One interpretation is that the story is criticizing complacency, not in a cruel way, but in a human way. It suggests that love that doesn't show up in crisis is incomplete. It suggests that devotion is tested not by words, but by whether you feel the descent even when you did not personally walk it. Still, we keep the solid ground separate from the mist. The text traditions are complex, and motives can be read in multiple ways. Sometimes the substitution is framed more like destiny than judgment. Sometimes it is a social myth about seasonal absence and return. Sometimes it is a commentary on relationships. You feel tears prick your eyes, but they do not fall. The underworld air dries them before they can travel. Even your sadness is being processed. The law figures stop a few steps away. One lifts a hand, palm open. Speak the name. You realize the law wants clarity, not wavering. It wants a named exchange. Your throat tightens so hard it feels like swallowing stone. You look at the beloved figure's face, then at the attendant who came for you. And you understand another layer. The helper does not get chosen. The helper does not pay. The helper carries the aftermath. The beloved figure begins to cry now, and the sight punches you with guilt. Not because you enjoy their fear, but because fear is finally proof that they understand. The underworld has forced understanding by force of policy, like the harshest teacher imaginable. A third joke slips in, softer this time, almost tender. If you ever thought relationship talks were hard, the underworld just invented the ultimate couples therapy session, and the payment plan is not negotiable. You exhale slowly. You try to speak carefully, because in a myth, words are levers. You say the name. The moment the name leaves your mouth, the air changes. It is subtle, but real, like a chord resolving, like an account balancing. The beloved figure jolts as if the sound itself touched them. The law figures move forward, not rushing, not grabbing violently, simply surrounding with inevitability. The beloved stares at you, betrayal and pleading tangled together. You want to explain. You want to apologize. You want to say you did not invent the rule. You are merely trapped inside it. But the underworld does not allow long speeches at moments like this. It allows one clean action. The beloved is guided away, step by step, toward a doorway that breathes cold. Their cries soften into sobs, then into a stunned silence as the threshold takes them. The law is efficient. The exchange is completed without celebration. You stand there shaking, the torchlight trembling in your hand. The attendant beside you places a hand on your shoulder, steadying you. Their touch is not judgment. It is support. The doorway closes with a quiet click. You're left with a terrible calm, the kind that arrives after something irreversible. The underworld has not screamed. It has not gloated. It has simply enforced balance, and now it expects you to live with what balance cost. A careful reading might suggest that this is the emotional core of substitution myths. They are not about cruelty. They are about the fact that survival often involves trade-offs, sacrifices, and debts that cannot be fully repaid. The story frames that truth in symbolic form so it can be carried. The corridor ahead brightens slightly, as if the living world is closer now. You take a step, then another. Your legs still feel weak, but the air begins to smell less like stone and more like wind. The attendant walks with you, silent, because what is there to say that would not sound too small? And somewhere deep behind you, the underworld returns to its quiet routines, holding the chosen one in its muted city, not as a spectacle, but as a settled entry in the law's ledger. You keep walking, and the torch's flame steadies again, stubborn and faithful, as if it is trying to remind you that even when a story hurts, it can still guide you toward the surface. You walk along a passage where the stone subtly changes color, shifting from deep charcoal to a softer gray, like dawn trying to negotiate with night. The air feels less dense here, not warm, not bright, just less heavy, as if the underworld is giving you a corridor where ideas can travel farther than footsteps. In the torchlight, the walls show faint carvings that look like boats, reeds and waves. Not a literal river in front of you, but a suggestion of water. It's the kind of image that makes your mind wander across maps without you meaning to. You stand still, breathing slowly, and you notice how a single symbol can open an entire world. Most historians agree that descent stories appear across many ancient cultures, even when those cultures are far apart in language and landscape. That is the steady ground tonight. The details differ, but the shape repeats. Someone crosses a boundary. Someone enters a realm tied to death or the divine. Someone returns or tries to, carrying a change. You follow the carvings and imagine a different land, a different river, a different kind of darkness. Your mind drifts to Egypt, where the underworld is not always down in the same way. It can be beneath, yes, but it can also be a hidden dimension threaded through the sky and the earth. What's broadly accepted is that ancient Egyptian religion pictured a complex afterlife, often called the Duat, where the dead travel, face challenges, and seek a stable place in the next existence. This is not one neat story, but a huge set of traditions, spells, and images that change over time. Still, the underlying pattern is recognizable. A journey beyond ordinary life that requires knowledge, preparation, and sometimes help. You picture a boat gliding through dark water, reed banks ghosting by. You smell mud and lotus and that clean, metallic scent that comes off a river at night. The torchlight in your hand feels like it belongs on a prow. A careful reading might suggest that Egyptian descent imagery is less about punishment and more about navigation. The dead are travelers. The afterlife is terrain. That interpretation matches the way many Egyptian texts emphasize guidance and correct ritual speech. As if the cosmos has doors that open when you know how to speak to them. Let me rephrase that more carefully. It is a possibility, not a certainty. But it fits what we often see. The afterlife is not merely a place. It is a route. And there is another famous traveler in Egyptian tradition, so the sun itself. Most historians agree that Egyptian cosmology includes the idea of the sun god traveling through the Duat each night and returning at dawn. A cycle that makes the darkness feel less final. The night becomes a descent, and the morning becomes a return. That is not a simple fairy tale. It is a cosmic schedule, repeated daily, turning the scariest fact of human life into a rhythm you can trust. You feel how soothing that is. If the sun can survive the night, maybe you can survive yours. Also, your brain quietly appreciates that the sun is basically the original daily commuter, showing up on time with no coffee and no complaints. If you ever need motivation, imagine being the sun and having to do that route forever. Suddenly, answering emails seems less dramatic. Your steps carry you onward, and the carvings on the wall change again. The boats fade. In their place, you see wheat, pomegranate shapes, and a figure holding a torch. Greece arrives in your imagination the way a story arrives in a theater, with dramatic lighting and a chorus that absolutely has opinions. What's broadly accepted is that Greek myth includes descent narratives, often called katabasis, where heroes and gods travel into the underworld. One of the most famous is the story of Persephone, whose time in the underworld is tied to the grief of Demeter and the cycle of growth and barrenness. In the most familiar version, Persephone's presence below is linked to the seasons above. The myth is not a scientific explanation of weather, but it is a human explanation of why the world turns green and then turns spare. You picture a field going quiet. You picture a mother searching. You picture a girl tasting a pomegranate seed, not fully understanding what the seed means until it's already inside her. One interpretation is that the Persephone story encodes social realities about marriage, separation, and the fear of losing children to forces you cannot control. That reading is debated, and it should be offered gently, because ancient myths do not come with author notes. Still, it resonates. The underworld in this myth is not only death, it is the place where loved ones go when they are beyond reach. You walk, and the torchlight feels like Demeter's insistence, a stubborn refusal to let the world stay dark. There is another Greek descent that feels different in tone. Orpheus. Most historians agree that the Orpheus myth includes a musician descending into the underworld to retrieve his beloved. He uses song, not strength, to soften the underworld's rules, and he is given a conditional path back. The condition is famous. Do not look back until you are both fully out. In many tellings, he looks back. He loses what he came for. It's a story that makes your stomach tighten because it is so painfully human. You know the rule. You agree to the rule. Then your fear demands proof, and the demand breaks the rule. A more cautious explanation could be that this myth is a warning about doubt, impatience, and the limits of control. Or it could be about grief itself, the way grief makes you look backward even when you want to walk forward. Or it could simply be a tragic tale designed to sting the listener into silence. Myth can do all of those things at once. You take another step and think. Imagine being Orpheus in the last stretch, hearing footsteps behind you, wanting to believe, wanting to confirm. Your brain is screaming. Just one quick glance, and your heart is like, yes, please, we would like to ruin everything immediately. That's joke number 2, and it is also uncomfortably accurate. Humans are incredible at self-sabotage, and we do it with passion. The wall carvings show a different figure now. Stronger shoulders, a club in hand. Not every descent is soft. Greek myth also tells of heroes like Heracles entering the underworld as a labor, and Odysseus performing rituals to speak with the dead in the land of shadows. What's broadly accepted is that these stories exist in different forms and serve different purposes. Some emphasize strength, some emphasize cleverness, some emphasize humility before cosmic powers. But the descent motif persists, like a test that every culture keeps reusing because it works. You pause and listen to the quiet. It is the same quiet that underworlds always seem to have. Not silence, but a muffled stillness that makes you aware of your own breathing. Now, your mind wants to connect the dots. It wants to ask a question that feels obvious once you notice it. Why do these descent patterns appear in so many places? Historians still argue whether these similarities come mainly from contact and cultural exchange, or from parallel invention rooted in shared human psychology. That is the exact debate line tonight, and it matters. The Mediterranean and Near East had trade routes, migrations, wars, marriages between elites, and a constant movement of stories. Ideas can travel with merchants as easily as copper and cloth. At the same time, people everywhere face death, grief, and seasonal change. You do not need a caravan to invent a story about losing someone and wanting them back. You only need a heart. There's no full consensus, and that uncertainty is not a flaw. It is the mystery shaped like a question mark, the kind you can hold without needing to solve. You walk again, and the corridor widens into a space where the ceiling feels higher. Your torchlight catches on a wall painting that looks almost like a constellation. Scattered points connected by faint lines. Here is where a fringe idea wanders in, politely, without claiming to be the boss of the conversation. A fringe idea proposes that descent myths are coded star maps, reflecting ancient astronomy and seasonal cycles in symbolic form. This theory isn't widely accepted, and direct evidence tying specific myth steps to specific constellations is often thin. Still, it remains popular because ancient peoples did observe the sky with extraordinary care, and because the descent pattern can feel like a journey through stages. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a playful lens. What if the underworld is not only beneath, but also beyond? A metaphor for the night sky where the sun disappears and returns. You let that thought float for a moment. You do not grip it. You do not announce it as truth. You simply let it add a cinematic shimmer to the walls. What if every descent story is a different language describing the same nightly event? The way darkness swallows light and then releases it. You keep walking, and the painting fades into carved relief again. You see a scale, then a feather, then a small jar. Your mind returns to Egypt and that famous image of weighing the heart. Many people know it through later retellings, but the mainstream anchor is stable. Egyptian afterlife imagery often includes judgment, balance, and the hope of passing safely into a blessed state. That is not identical to Greek Hades or Mesopotamian underworld courts, but the family resemblance is there. One interpretation is that these myths function as behavioral teaching tools, not always in a simplistic, be good or else way, but in a communal way. They shape how people grieve. They shape how people imagine justice. They shape how people accept the idea that life has limits. That is interpretation, and it should be held gently, because myth is not a school textbook. Still, myths are among the oldest methods humans have for passing values across generations. You smile to yourself, because your modern brain wants to say, so myths are ancient social media. And honestly, kind of. Stories spread, stories trend, stories get remixed. Sometimes the remixes are better than the original, and sometimes they're just confusing. If you have ever watched a myth get turned into a movie where everyone has perfect hair, congratulations. You have witnessed the ancient tradition of creative liberties. You move deeper, and the air smells like dry herbs for a moment, like thyme crushed underfoot. It makes you think of mystery religions and initiation rituals, the kind that promised secret knowledge. In Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries are often discussed as an initiation cult tied to Demeter and Persephone, offering participants a powerful experience that was deliberately kept private. Most historians agree that these mysteries existed and were significant, though the exact details are, by design, hard to pin down. A careful reading might suggest that descent myths provided a mythic framework for such initiations, giving participants a symbolic narrative of loss, darkness, and return. Again, a possibility, not a certainty. Still, the fit is tempting. You enter, you are changed. You emerge, you walk and feel your eyelids grow heavy. The underworld, in any culture, has a sedative quality. It slows time, it draws your attention inward. And then you notice something new in the corridor. Small offerings set into niches. A cup, a bit of bread, a string of beads. Simple objects placed with intention. Most historians agree that many ancient cultures practiced offerings to the dead and maintained rituals of remembrance. Even if the myths differ, the human action is similar. You feed memory. You honor absence. You keep the connection alive in a form that does not require the dead to return physically. That is mainstream ground, and it is deeply human. One interpretation is that descent myths are the narrative cousin of these offerings. When you cannot bring someone back, you bring them into story. You visit them in imagination. You speak their name. You create a path, even if it is only a symbolic one. The cinematic thought returns, gentle and soft. What if every culture is tracing the same faint footprint in the dark? Not because of one hidden secret, not because of a single master plan, but because humans keep walking into the same emotional terrain and leaving similar tracks. You stop by a niche and imagine placing something there. Not a grand treasure, just a small token, like a coin, or a pinch of herbs, or the memory of a voice. You place it, and you feel a quiet shift. Like the underworld appreciates gestures more than speeches. You breathe in slowly, you breathe out slower. And now the corridor offers you an exit that is not a door, not a gate, but a widening of the air itself. The underworld is not telling you to run. It is simply allowing you to carry the comparison forward, to let Egypt, Greece, and other traditions sit beside each other without forcing them into one single meaning. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. You keep walking, and the torchlight steadies, warm and small, like a promise that the story can keep going without becoming heavy. You step into a space that feels like the inside of a drum. The corridor opens into a round chamber where the walls curve gently, catching torchlight and returning it in soft, amber pulses. When you breathe, the sound seems to linger a fraction longer than it should, as if the room is listening back. The air smells like limestone and faint smoke, the kind of smoke that clings to stone long after a fire is gone. A narrow bench is carved into the wall, worn smooth by bodies that sat here and waited. Beside it, a shallow bowl rests in a niche. It is empty now, but you can imagine it holding oil, water, or a pinch of salt. Nothing fancy, just the sort of simple object humans use when they are trying to make a moment feel meaningful. Most historians agree that rites of passage were part of many ancient societies. People marked transitions with ritual, childhood to adulthood, ordinary person to priest, living to dead. Archaeology suggests that temples, courtyards, and sometimes caves or enclosed rooms were used for ceremonies, gatherings, and controlled experiences meant to change someone's status. The details vary wildly across regions and eras, but the human pattern is steady when life changes. People create a structured moment to hold the change. You walk around the chamber and notice the floor is slightly lower in the center, like a shallow basin. Your torchlight reveals faint scuff marks, footprints maybe, or the evidence of repeated movement. It makes you think of circles, dances, processions, the kinds of actions that become sacred through repetition. A careful reading might suggest that descent myths are poetic mirrors of ritual, not always a direct script, not always a literal reenactment, but a symbolic framework that communities could use to talk about transformation. That interpretation is tempting because the story shape fits the ritual shape. Entry, stripping down, testing, return. Still, it is a possibility, not a certainty. Myths can inspire rituals. Rituals can inspire myths. And sometimes they might just resemble each other because human minds like structure. You sit on the stone bench. It is cold at first, then slowly less cold as your body heat pushes back. In the quiet, you imagine a real person sitting here long ago, anxious, excited, trying to look calm in front of elders who definitely had opinions about posture. Your brain offers a small joke, gentle and sleepy. You think about how every initiation in history probably involved at least one person whispering, "Is this supposed to happen?" And another person whispering back, "Yes, stop asking questions. Humans never change. We just upgrade the outfits." You stand again and move toward a small opening on the far side of the chamber. It is low, forcing you to crouch. The passage beyond is short and tight, and you can feel the stone close to your shoulders. Then it opens into another room, darker, with a higher ceiling. This room is different. It feels private. The air is cooler. Your torchlight reveals a wall with faint scratches arranged in lines. Some look deliberate, some look accidental. It is the kind of surface archaeologists might study with careful patience, trying to decide what was intentional and what was just someone passing time with a sharp stone. You step closer and notice a simple image scratched into the wall. A doorway shape, a stick figure, a line that could be a river. It is not a masterpiece. It is more like a note, a reminder, a mark that says someone was here and wanted to leave a trace. Archaeology suggests that people used symbols and marks in ritual spaces, sometimes to claim presence, sometimes to communicate, sometimes to participate in a shared tradition. Even when we cannot decode every scratch, the pattern of marking itself is meaningful. It suggests attention. It suggests intention. You walk slowly, letting the chamber guide your pace, and your mind begins to build a picture of a ritual descent. Not a literal trip into a supernatural underworld, but a human-made experience designed to feel like one. Maybe it is a young person being initiated. Maybe they are led through a series of rooms. Maybe they are asked to remove jewelry. Maybe they are asked to give up a name for a night. Maybe they are blindfolded and guided by a voice they trust. Maybe they are confronted with a mask, a chant, a symbol that frightens them just enough to make the moment stick. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. What is documented is that many societies created initiation rituals, and some of those rituals involved secrecy, special knowledge, or controlled environments. What is interpretation is the claim that specific descent myths map directly onto specific rituals. What is imagination is you walking through these chambers and feeling how easy it is for architecture to shape emotion. You pause near a niche where the stone is blackened. A fire once burned here. The soot is old, but it is still visible. That makes you think of the social side of ritual. If someone was initiated here, others were watching, not necessarily inside this room, but somewhere nearby. Ritual is rarely only personal. It is often a community agreeing that someone has changed. Most historians agree that in the ancient Mediterranean and Near East, temples were not only places of worship, but also centers of community life, economy, and authority. Ritual was a kind of language everyone recognized. It told you who had power, who had responsibility, and who belonged. One interpretation is that underworld stories trained people in how to accept limits and laws. When a myth emphasizes gates, judges, and procedures, it can echo how real life worked. Contracts, oaths, courts, and temple rules were part of daily reality for many city dwellers. The myth then becomes a cosmic version of familiar systems, making the boundary between life and death feel like part of an ordered world. Historians still argue whether descent myths reflect actual initiation rites, or whether they are primarily literary and theological stories that later people associated with ritual because the shapes match so well. You let that debate rest in your mind like a stone warmed by the hand. You do not need to solve it tonight. You only need to feel how it changes the way you listen. If the myth is a ritual mirror, then every gate is a lesson. If it is a literary invention, then every gate is a dramatic device. Either way, it works. You walk deeper into the chamber and hear a faint hum. It might be your own ears. It might be wind moving through cracks. It might be the room's acoustics turning silence into sound. You test it by humming a single note, soft and steady. The note blooms. The chamber holds it. The sound seems to circle you and return. Like a slow bird, a quirky modern tidbit offered gently as possibility. Some researchers and enthusiasts have wondered whether certain ancient ritual spaces were chosen partly for acoustics, because echo and resonance can make voices feel supernatural. This is suggestive, not conclusive. Still, if you imagine a chant in a resonant chamber, you can see how sound could become part of the ritual technology. A voice that lingers feels like a voice from elsewhere. Your mind smiles at itself, because you realize humans discovered surround sound long before speakers. They just used caves. That is joke number 2, and you accept it like a warm sip of tea. You move toward another opening, and the passage slopes slightly downward, not dramatically, just enough that your body notices. The floor changes texture, from smooth stone to rougher ground. Your torchlight reveals small pebbles and a few broken fragments that could be natural, or could be old debris. You think about funeral rituals, another place where descent imagery makes sense. When people bury the dead, they literally place someone into the earth. Even in cultures that practiced cremation, there is often a ritual separation, a passage, a controlled transition. The living do not simply lose someone. They perform the loss, and the performance helps the mind accept it. Most historians agree that burial and mortuary practices are widespread in ancient societies, and they often include offerings, grave goods, or carefully arranged spaces. Archaeology suggests that the dead were treated with intention, and that intention implies belief, respect, fear, love, or some mixture of all three. One interpretation is that descent myths are narrative versions of burial logic. The story gives the dead a destination. It gives the living a map. It says, they went somewhere, and the journey has rules, even if no one truly knows. The map itself can soothe. You reach a small chamber where the ceiling is low and the air feels close. Your torchlight reveals a flat stone in the center, like a platform. Your brain labels it immediately as an altar, because brains love labeling. But you stop yourself. It could be anything. A natural slab, a resting stone, a place to set objects. Let me rephrase that more carefully. It could have been used ritually. But the evidence in this imagined space is thin. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. You place your hand on the flat stone. It is cold and steady. You feel your own pulse in your fingertips, a soft tap-tap that makes the whole underworld feel less abstract. You are alive, you are warm, you are present. That is when you notice the faint smell of herbs again. Not strong, just a trace, like a memory of sage or thyme. It makes you think of another debated topic. A fringe idea proposes that some initiation or descent-like rituals might have involved altered states, achieved through fasting, sleep deprivation, rhythmic sound, or possibly psychoactive plants in some contexts. This theory isn't widely accepted as a universal explanation, and it would vary by culture and evidence. Still, it remains a popular speculation because altered states can make symbols feel real, and many societies did explore trance, vision, and ecstatic experience in controlled ways. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it adds a cinematic layer. What if the underworld was sometimes entered through the mind as much as through the ground? You take a slow breath and decide not to chase the thought too far. Tonight is gentle. You let it drift like smoke. Present, but not controlling. Your mind offers joke number 3. Softer than the others. If ancient initiations involved fasting, you suspect at least one initiate spent the whole sacred night thinking about bread. Spiritual transformation is noble, but hunger is extremely persuasive. You walk around the stone platform and notice tiny grooves, like lines carved to guide liquid. Again, it could be ritual. It could be practical. It could be both. Ancient life often mixed sacred and practical without separating them like we do. You step back into the passage and keep moving, and you begin to sense how ritual and story might cooperate. A ritual gives you experience. A story gives you meaning. The ritual makes you feel the descent. The story tells you what the feeling is for. In that sense, descent myths might function like a community's emotional toolkit. When someone is grieving, the story says, "You're not alone." When someone is changing, the story says, "Change has a path." When someone is afraid, the story says, "Fear can be walked through step by step." Most historians agree that humans use narrative to organize difficult realities, and that myths often address fundamental experiences: death, love, power, fertility, loss. That is broad, mainstream ground. You can feel it tonight as you walk. The stone, the darkness, the torch. They all become a language for things your ordinary words struggle to hold. You reach a final doorway and feel warmer air beyond it. Not hot, just less cold. Your torchlight looks brighter, as if the space ahead is more forgiving. You step through and find yourself in a long hall where the walls are lined with shallow shelves. On some shelves are small objects, stones, shells, bits of clay shaped by hand. They are humble. They are not treasure. They are tokens. You realize what tokens do in ritual. They anchor memory. They say, I was here. I crossed. I changed, even if nobody else knows the details. The object remembers for you. You choose one token in your mind, a smooth pebble, and you hold it. The pebble is cool and ordinary, and that is why it works. You can carry it without turning it into a trophy. It is simply a reminder that descent does not have to be dramatic to be real. You close your fingers around it and feel your shoulders loosen. The underworld, as an idea, stops being only a place of fear. It becomes a method, a way humans practice transformation safely inside a story. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. You take another slow breath. The hall's air feels easier. The torch burns steady. The pebble sits in your hand like a calm pulse, and you keep walking, not rushing, not resisting, letting the myth and the possibility of ritual settle into you the way sleep settles into a tired body. Softly, patiently, one gentle step at a time, you enter a corridor where the ceiling suddenly opens upward, and your torchlight can finally breathe. The stone above you is blacker than the walls, and for a moment it feels less like rock and more like night sky. The air is cooler here, but it is a clean coolness, like stepping outside after a hot day, when the world quiets and the stars start to appear one by one. Along the right wall, someone has carved tiny dots, not random pockmarks. Dots placed with intention, clustered in patterns that feel familiar even if you cannot name them. A small cluster like a spoon, a line of 3, a scattered spray like seeds tossed on soil. You slow down because humans have a deep instinct for connecting dots, especially at night. Most historians agree that ancient Mesopotamian cultures observed the sky carefully and recorded celestial phenomena. The mainstream evidence includes long traditions of tracking planets, noting eclipses, and building systematic lists of stars and constellations in later periods. The sky was not just pretty, it was practical and sacred. A calendar, a message board, and a source of awe. People watched for omens, for seasonal timing, for patterns that helped them make sense of uncertainty. You lift your torch a little higher, and the dots seem to shimmer, as if the wall is trying to become a sky. That is imagination, of course. But it is the gentle kind that helps you feel the ancient obsession with above and below. If the dead are beneath, and the gods are above, then a descent story might be a bridge between the two directions. A careful reading might suggest that descent imagery sometimes echoes astronomical thinking. Not always, not in a strict code, but in a mood, a rhythm, a sense of passage through layers, like moving through stages of night. Let me rephrase that more carefully. This is a possibility, not a certainty. The evidence is uneven, and it depends on which text, which era, which translation, and which interpretation you are using. Still, the idea keeps returning because it is intuitive. The sky is full of gates. You walk closer to the wall and trace one cluster of dots with your finger, careful not to burn yourself with the torch. The stone feels slightly rough, and you imagine a scribe, or a priest, or a curious observer tapping these points in with a tool, trying to fix the heavens in place so they cannot drift. Your mind offers a small joke, because it cannot resist. You think ancient people were basically doing the first version of pinning a location, only instead of pinning coffee shops, they pinned stars. Same human impulse, just fewer ads. You keep moving, and the corridor turns. On the left wall, a new carving appears, a rosette shape, then a star, then a crescent. The symbols look like a small sequence, almost like a sentence written in icons. Rosette, star, crescent. You feel the hair on your arms lift, not from fear, but from recognition. Those shapes feel like the kind of language ancient people used when writing and drawing blended together. Archaeology suggests that symbols like stars and crescents appear in Mesopotamian art and iconography, often tied to deities and celestial bodies. The moon and the planet Venus, in particular, were important in many traditions, and Venus is often associated with Inanna or Ishtar in later frameworks. That connection is mainstream in a broad sense, even if specific details can be complex across time and region. The solid ground is that celestial observation and divine symbolism often overlap. Now the fringe lens enters softly, like a rumor you hear in a quiet museum hallway. A fringe idea proposes that descent stories, especially those with multiple gates, encode a kind of star knowledge. In this view, the gates are not just underworld thresholds. They are steps through a celestial diagram, perhaps tied to planetary movements, seasonal shifts, or layers of the cosmos. This theory isn't widely accepted, and the evidence for a precise one-to-one mapping is thin. Still, it remains popular because it feels elegant. It gives the story a second dimension. It says, the journey down is also a journey across the sky. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes an interesting way to look at the carvings in front of you. You walk, and the corridor widens into a chamber shaped like an oval. The floor is etched with a circle, and within the circle are smaller markings, like spokes on a wheel. Your torchlight dances across them, and you feel like you are standing inside a diagram. The circle could be purely symbolic. It could be a ritual boundary, or it could be a simplified sky map, or it could be all of those at once, depending on who drew it and why. You step into the circle and look down. The spokes point in different directions. One section of the circle contains a cluster of tiny dots. Another holds a crescent. Another holds a small star shape. It feels like a language that expects you to already know the grammar. Most historians agree that ancient peoples often use the sky to structure time. Seasons, planting, harvesting, festivals, the timing of rituals. All of these can be anchored to celestial cycles. Even without modern clocks, the sky's reliable. It returns. It repeats. And when life feels unstable, repetition is a form of comfort. One interpretation is that a descent myth might borrow that comfort. It might shape itself like the night. A slow fading, a deep middle, a return. Even if the story is not literally about astronomy, it can still echo astronomy in its emotional architecture. You feel that echo now. Standing inside the circle, the torchlight is your little sun. The chamber is your night. The markings are your stars. Historians still argue whether astronomical content in myths is intentional coding by ancient authors, or whether modern readers are projecting patterns onto stories because patterns are what humans crave. That debate is important because it keeps you honest. It reminds you not to turn a beautiful possibility into a claim. It reminds you that mystery is not the same as proof. You step out of the circle and move toward the far wall, where a doorway leads into a narrow passage. The passage slopes gently upward, and the air smells faintly of dry grass, like someone brought a bundle of reeds here long ago. You squeeze through and emerge into a small room with a single opening in the ceiling. The opening is a perfect square. When you look up, you see darkness, not a cave darkness, a deeper darkness, as if the square is a window straight into the night. Your torchlight licks the edges of the opening, and you imagine a real night above, full of stars. The square could be ventilation. It could be architectural coincidence. It could be a deliberate viewing shaft. In real archaeology, such claims require careful evidence. Here, in this gentle story space, you hold it as a possibility. A more cautious explanation could be that people built openings for practical reasons, and later stories connected them to meaning, or the meaning could have been there from the start. There's no full consensus in many cases because ancient builders did not leave instruction manuals. You tilt your head back and let your eyes rest on the square. The sky above is silent. You feel your breathing slow. You feel the way darkness can be soothing when it is not threatening. Now the cinematic thought arrives, soft as a blanket. What if the descent is not only down into earth, but also into night? What if the underworld is the space the sun travels through when it disappears? What if the gates are the hours, the watches of the night, the stages of darkness, not a literal schedule carved in stone, but a poetic idea that night itself is an underworld every day must cross? You smile, because your brain wants to turn that into a modern analogy. You think the sun basically does a daily bedtime routine, goes into the underworld, and then shows up in the morning pretending it never left. Honestly, that is the most relatable cosmic behavior. That is joke number 2. It lands softly and then fades. You step away from the ceiling opening and notice something else in the room. A shallow shelf with a clay object resting on it. It looks like a small tablet, not covered in writing, but impressed with a pattern of lines. The pattern resembles a ladder or a staircase, with steps climbing upward. The object feels symbolic, and your mind immediately wants to interpret it. Ladder equals ascent, descent equals steps down. The object could be a reminder that every descent implies an ascent, at least in the imagination, even if not in every story outcome. But you keep the solid ground separate from the mist. You simply observe. Someone wanted steps to be seen. You hold the object in your hand. It is cool, slightly gritty. Your thumb fits into the shallow impressions. It feels like a toy, a teaching tool, or a token. You imagine someone tracing these steps while listening to a myth, letting the finger movement anchor the story in the body. Most historians agree that education in scribal cultures involved repetitive practice and memorization. People learned by copying, reciting, and handling objects. Stories could be taught through repetition, and symbols could be used as memory aids. That does not prove this object is a lesson tool, but it makes the idea plausible. One interpretation is that myths were not only told for entertainment, but also used to transmit knowledge about time, ritual, and the cosmos. Again, that is a broad interpretation, and it varies by culture and context. But the overlap between myth and knowledge is a well-known feature of many ancient traditions. A myth can be a story and a storage device at the same time. You set the tablet back down and return to the corridor. The dots and stars on the walls seem to intensify as you walk, as if you are moving deeper into an astronomical gallery. You see a carving of a bull shape, then a scorpion shape, then a fish-like curve. Your modern mind wants to label them as zodiac signs, but you stop yourself. Ancient constellations do not always match modern ones, and names change across languages and centuries. Still, Animal-shaped star patterns are common because humans love to see living forms in the sky. You pass a carving that looks like a lion. You grin, because lions show up everywhere in ancient iconography. And you can almost hear a bored cosmic artisan saying, "We could carve literally anything, but lions are always a hit." That is joke number 3. And it is true in spirit, even if it is not a documented quote. The corridor ends at a set of doors that are not stone this time, but wood reinforced with metal bands. They look newer than the surrounding rock, or at least they look like they have been maintained. The doors are covered with small stamped circles, each one with a dot in the center. Stars again, or seals, or both. You place your palm against the wood. It is warmer than stone, as if the living world is nearer. The door does not open yet. It waits for the right kind of approach. A fringe idea proposes that certain myths preserve technical knowledge in disguised form because stories are easier to remember than tables of numbers. This theory isn't widely accepted as a universal rule, and it can be taken too far, turning every detail into secret math. Still, the general concept has a merit in a modest way. Mnemonic stories exist in many cultures. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, you can imagine a myth that helps people remember cycles, calendars, or ritual timing without needing to read. You step back and look at the star-stamped circles again. Your mind imagines them as checkpoints, a list of nights, a sequence of appearances, Venus brightening, fading, reappearing, the moon waxing, waning, a seasonal star rising at a certain time each year. It is suggestive, not conclusive. You breathe slowly, and the door finally opens. Not with a dramatic swing, but with a quiet release, like a latch giving way. On the other side is a hallway lit by a faint, bluish glow. Not from a torch, but from something that feels like reflected moonlight. The walls are smoother here, and the air smells faintly of fresh water. You feel your shoulders relax, as if the story is giving you a calmer space after all that symbol reading. You walk down the moonlit hallway and realize something that brings the whole debate into focus. Even if the astronomy coding theory is wrong, even if there is no hidden star map tucked inside the gates, the sky connection still matters. Because humans have always used the sky as a mirror. We look up and see patterns. We look down and build myths. We find ways to connect the two, because it makes the universe feel like it is speaking in a language we can almost understand. Most historians agree that myth and observation often coexisted in ancient life. People could be careful sky watchers and also tell stories that personified celestial bodies. Those were not separate categories the way modern science and fiction are often separated. They were part of one worldview. A careful reading might suggest that the descent myth is powerful because it can operate on multiple levels without breaking. It can be a story about loss and return. It can be a story about law and boundaries. It can be a story that feels like the night sky, layered and rhythmic. You keep walking, and the bluish light softens. It is not bright enough to wake you. It is just enough to guide your steps. You reach a final alcove where the wall holds a small carving of a star inside a doorway. A star within a gate, above and below meeting in one symbol. You stare at it for a long moment, letting it settle. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. Documented is the ancient attention to the sky. Interpretation is the possibility of coded meaning. Imagination is you walking through a corridor where stars are carved into stone and the underworld feels like night itself. You take one slow breath, then another. The torch is no longer needed. The moonlight glow is enough. The air is calm. The symbols are quiet. And you continue, carrying only a gentle sense that the darkness, whether under earth or under sky, can be mapped by story, even if the map is drawn in dots and questions rather than certainties. You walk into a corridor where the air changes again. Not warmer exactly, but lighter, like the world is slowly remembering how to be breathable. The walls here are no longer carved with quartz or stars or stern symbols. Instead, the stone is plain, and that plainness feels like mercy. Your footsteps sound softer, as if the floor is dusted with something fine and clean, like sifted ash or powdered clay. Ahead, a pale glow gathers. Not torchlight, not moonlight, but a thin early brightness that looks like it is trying not to wake anyone. It spreads along the corridor the way dawn spreads along a horizon, quietly, patiently, like it is doing you a favor. Most historians agree that many ancient myths end with some form of restoration, even when it is imperfect, a return, a rebalancing, a compromise that lets the world continue. This is a mainstream anchor worth holding close. The descent motif often pairs with an ascent or release, because humans crave the idea that darkness can be survived, and that survival has meaning. You walk toward the glow and notice a small object on the floor, right in the center of the path. It is a thin strip of clay, stamped with a simple seal pattern, not an official tablet full of writing, just a token. When you pick it up, it crumbles slightly under your thumb, and the dust smells faintly of dry earth. A token like this feels symbolic, the kind of thing a story uses to mark a passage. You turn it in your fingers and notice the seal pattern is a circle within a circle, with a line across the middle. It looks like a boundary and a bridge at the same time. One interpretation is that returns in underworld myths are rarely a total undoing. They are usually conditional. You come back changed, or you come back for part of the year, or you come back with a rule attached, or you come back while someone else remains. These conditions might suggest that ancient storytellers were not interested in fairy tale perfection. They were interested in a world that keeps its scars and still goes on. You keep walking, and the corridor opens into a long hall with a shallow channel running down the center. Water trickles through it, so gently you can barely hear it. The sound is calming in a way that reaches into your chest. The water is clear enough to reflect the pale glow from above, turning the channel into a ribbon of light. You crouch and touch it. It is cold and clean, and it wakes your fingertips without startling you. What's broadly accepted is that many cultures used water as a symbol of transition and renewal. Rivers mark boundaries. Springs promise return. Rain makes the ground smell alive again. Even when the myth does not feature a literal river crossing, the presence of water can imply movement from one state to another. Water is the world's way of saying, things can change form without disappearing. You walk beside the channel and notice that the stone along its edges is worn smooth, as if many hands have traced it. That detail makes you imagine ritual again, not as a claim, but as a human possibility. People might have touched water on the way out, the way you might rinse your hands after leaving a heavy conversation. A careful reading might suggest that return myths function like emotional washing. You go down into difficulty, then you come back with a small ritual cleansing, symbolic or real, to mark that you are not the same person who entered. Let me rephrase that more carefully. It is a possibility, not a certainty. But it fits a pattern. Humans love a closing gesture, a way to end a hard chapter. The pale glow strengthens, and you begin to smell something unexpected. Wet stone warmed by air that is slowly turning mild. If you have ever stepped outside right after a rain, when the pavement is still damp and the world smells fresh and mineral, you know the scent. It is the scent of a reset that does not erase the past. You smile, and your mind offers a small joke, soft enough not to wake anyone. You think, If the underworld had a gift shop, it would sell wet stone after rain as a candle scent. And honestly, you would buy it. It would be called renewal, and the label would be aggressively minimal. You keep moving, and the hall ends at a doorway with no guard. That absence feels important. The underworld is not forcing you out. It is allowing the cycle to continue, which is a different kind of authority. Beyond the doorway is a stairway, but this one is not the same as a descent stair. These steps rise gently, wide and shallow, designed for the tired and the careful. The stone is warmer under your feet, as if the earth itself is less cold, closer to the surface. You climb at a slow pace, and each step feels like a small agreement with life. Not an enthusiastic sprint, just a steady yes. Along the wall, you see a relief carving of plants. Not lush jungle plants, but the simplest forms: a sprout, a stalk, a seed pod. The artist did not try to impress anyone. They tried to remind you that growth happens quietly, in stages, and you rarely witness the moment it starts. Most historians agree that agricultural cycles shaped many ancient myths, because survival depended on understanding seasons and timing. When growth fails, people suffer. When growth returns, people breathe. So it makes sense that stories often align descent with scarcity and return with renewal. Even if the myth is not a literal farming manual, one interpretation is that the return motif offers psychological relief. After hearing about rules, loss, and stillness, the listener needs a release valve. The return gives that release. It tells your mind, yes, darkness exists, and also you can come back from it. That message can be practical. It can help a community endure hard months. It can help a person endure grief. It can help you tonight. Let your shoulders drop a little more. You reach a landing and find a small alcove holding a bowl of grain. The grains are dry, pale, and faintly golden in the light. You pick one up. It is tiny, almost nothing, and yet it contains a future. A fringe idea proposes that some descent and return stories hide ancient knowledge about planting, storage, and seasonal timing in symbolic form. This theory isn't widely accepted as a direct code, and it can be stretched too far if you start turning every myth into a secret farmer's almanac. Still, if we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it offers a gentle angle. What if a myth helped people remember the emotional truth of planting, the patience of waiting through darkness, and the relief of return? You roll the grain between your fingers and let it fall back into the bowl. The small sound it makes is oddly satisfying, like punctuation. You climb again, and the air grows brighter. It is still soft, still sleepy, but it has that early morning quality that makes you think of quiet kitchens and the first birds practicing their daily announcements like they are warming up for a concert. Another small joke slips in. You think birds truly believe they are the main characters of dawn. No audition, no rehearsal, just immediate confidence. You respect it, but also, please lower the volume. The stairway curves and brings you into a chamber where the ceiling is higher, and a faint breeze moves across your face. The breeze smells like outdoors. It smells like grass. It smells like distance. On the far wall is a carved scene that feels different from everything else. It shows two figures facing each other, hands raised, not in attack, but in agreement. Between them is a line that might be a boundary. Above the line is a sprouting plant. Below the line is a simple dot pattern that could represent the underworld, or soil, or night. You stare at the carving and feel the story's quiet insistence. Returns are often negotiated. In many myths, the return is not a triumph over death. It is a compromise with it, a schedule, a rule. a shared arrangement that keeps the cosmos from tearing itself apart. Historians still argue whether these negotiated returns reflect actual political realities, like treaties and seasonal taxation cycles, or whether they are primarily symbolic expressions of how people understood balance. You let that debate sit without demanding an answer. Either way, it makes sense. If your life is full of contracts and obligations, you might imagine the universe runs on contracts too. If your life is full of seasonal repetition, you might imagine the universe runs on repetition too. In both cases, the myth gives you a structure you can trust. You walk across the chamber and notice that the floor has a faint pattern etched into it, like a calendar grid, but blurred by time. Some lines intersect, some fade. It is not readable in a literal way, and that is fine. The emotion of it is readable. Time cycles. You step into the center of the chamber and feel the breeze again. Your torch flame, if you still carry one, would flicker here. But the light in the room does not depend on flame. It comes from above, filtered through a crack in the rock where a slice of early sky shows through. The sky is pale blue, almost gray, with a hint of warmth near the edge, as if the sun is still deciding whether to commit. You look up and breathe in. Slowly. You feel something uncoil inside you. Not happiness exactly. More like readiness. The kind of readiness you feel when you stop fighting the fact that life changes and start accepting that change can be survivable. A careful reading might suggest that the return in descent myths is not merely plot. It is instruction. It teaches the listener how to imagine themselves returning from their own dark passages. Again, that is interpretation, not a guarantee. But it is a gentle way to see why these stories keep being told. They do not erase pain. They make pain narratable. You step toward the crack of sky and feel the stone under your feet warming slightly, as if the earth is holding on to the last memory of night and the first hint of day at the same time. You reach up and touch the edge of the crack, careful not to scrape your fingers. The stone is rough and alive with tiny grains. You can feel it crumble slightly. The surface world is close. Another idea arrives. Not fringe, just human. The return feels like breathing after holding your breath. It feels like loosening your jaw after clenching all night. It feels like stepping out of a room where you had to be careful, into a room where you can be ordinary again. You move along the wall and find a shallow basin set into the stone. It holds a thin film of water, fed by condensation or a tiny drip from above. The water is so still it looks like glass. You cup your hands and scoop a little, then splash it gently on your face. The cold makes you blink, and the sensation is instantly clarifying, like waking up without panic. This is the kind of small action myths love, a simple gesture that marks a shift. It is not magic. It is meaning. You wipe your face and laugh quietly at yourself, because the underworld, the cosmos, and ancient symbols have brought you to something very practical. Washing your face. The most ancient ritual known to exhausted humans everywhere. That is joke number 3, and it lands like a soft pillow. You step away from the basin and look again at the sky crack. The light has grown slightly stronger. The breeze has a hint of warmth now. You begin to sense that the return, in myth terms, is not a single door you walk through. It is a gradual re-entry into color, sound, and breath. It is the world becoming more specific again. The stones becoming less symbolic and more just stones. You walk toward a final passage that slopes upward, and the smell changes again. You smell damp soil. You smell leaves. You smell that rain on warm stone scent again. Stronger now. Like the world is opening a window, you step through the passage and find yourself in a small grotto where water trickles down a wall of rock and disappears into moss. The moss is bright green, almost glowing in the early light. A tiny plant clings to a crack, its leaves trembling in the breeze. You stand very still and watch the leaves. The plant does not rush. It does not worry about the underworld. It just grows where it can. What's broadly accepted is that ancient people often used plant imagery to express renewal, because plants embody return in the simplest way. They vanish and reappear. They die back and rise again. Whether the myth is about a goddess, a hero, a son, or a loved one, the plant is the quiet evidence that cycles exist. One interpretation is that this is the soft promise at the heart of descent stories. Not that everything returns exactly as it was, but that something returns. A season, a breath, a willingness to keep going. You reach down and touch the moss with one finger. It is cool and springy, and it leaves a faint green trace on your skin. You smile at the trace. It feels like proof of life, simple and honest. And you keep walking, guided by light that grows without shouting, carrying the idea that return can be gentle, that renewal can be imperfect, and that even a tired mind can follow a small path back to calm. You step into a passage where the stone gives way to packed earth, and the air tastes like outdoors. Not fully outdoors yet, but close enough that your lungs recognize it and relax. The light is soft and steady, the kind that does not demand attention. It simply exists, like a quiet friend sitting in the same room. A small breeze brushes your cheek. It carries the scent of leaves, damp soil, and something faintly sweet, like flowering grass. You realize you have been holding tension in places you forgot you had muscles. Your jaw loosens. Your shoulders drop. Your hands unclench as if they were gripping invisible handles. The passage opens into a gentle hillside. Not a dramatic cliff, not a heroic overlook, just a slope with low plants and scattered stones, and a sky that has fully decided to be morning. The sun is still low, and the light is pale gold. It makes everything look newly made. Most historians agree that myths endure because they match human experiences that never go out of style. Grief, change, fear, love, loss, hope. The descent myth in particular lasts because it gives shape to the feeling of going through something hard and coming out different. It is not a factual map of a literal underworld for most modern listeners. It is a symbolic map of the inner landscape people keep revisiting. You walk a few steps onto the hillside and look back. The opening in the ground is there, but it looks ordinary now, like a shallow cave or a crack between rocks. No glowing warning sign, no dramatic smoke, just an entrance that could be ignored by anyone who is busy and not paying attention. That is one of the strangest things about these stories. The boundary between ordinary and mythic can look like nothing at all until you decide to see it. You sit on a flat stone and let the morning air wash over you. A bird calls once, then stops, like it remembered this is a quiet hour. The plants around you move gently in the breeze, and their movement is so simple it feels like a lesson. One interpretation is that the descent myth is not something you solve. It is something you carry. A careful reading might suggest it functions like a guide for letting go safely. Not by pretending loss is easy, but by showing that loss has a structure, gates, rules, exchanges, returns that are not perfect but still real. That is interpretation, not certainty. But it is a humane way to understand why these stories keep helping people. Historians still argue whether descent myths are primarily religious teachings, political metaphors, ritual reflections, or psychological maps. There is no full consensus, and it is better that way. A single locked meaning would make the story smaller. A story that stays open can keep meeting new listeners in new rooms. At new times of night, you look down at your hands resting on your knees. They are empty, and that emptiness feels calmer than you expected. You think about how many things you normally carry that are not visible. Worries, plans, regrets, little arguments you replay, imaginary conversations that you win in your head but never get to have in real life. A small joke arrives, gentle as a yawn. You think your brain truly believes it is a professional screenwriter. It keeps drafting scenes nobody asked for. If your mind had a workplace, human resources would be very concerned about the overtime. You smile, and the smile feels like a soft reset. Now, you let the myth's core idea settle into something practical. The descent is a reminder that hard passages exist. The return is a reminder that you can walk through them without becoming only the hard passage. Even if a piece of you stays in the quiet place, even if you lose something you cannot fully replace, you still come back with breath. That is the gentle power of the pattern. It does not promise perfection. It offers endurance. You stand and start walking along the hillside path. The path is narrow, lined with small stones, and it curves around patches of grass that look freshly rinsed. Dew clings to the blades. When you step near them, the dew shakes loose and falls, tiny drops catching sunlight like brief sparks. What's broadly accepted is that many ancient cultures used cycles as comfort. Seasons return, the sun returns, the moon returns in its phases. Crops return, most years, if luck and labor cooperate. The descent myth belongs to that same family of repeating reassurance. It says, the darkness has a rhythm. You can survive it by treating it as a passage rather than a prison. A fringe idea proposes that there is hidden, unified coding in descent myths across cultures, as if one ancient system was being passed along in disguise. This theory isn't widely accepted, and the evidence for a single origin story is thin and debated. Still, it remains popular because it offers a thrilling simplicity. One key, one blueprint, one secret map. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it can be enjoyed as a thought experiment. What if humans have been telling one long, continuous story with different masks? What if the underworld is the same room in every myth, just painted in different colors? You let the thought drift by like a cloud. You do not grab it. You do not build a fortress of certainty out of it. You simply let it add a little shimmer to the morning air. Then you let it go. You walk on and hear water nearby. A small stream runs along the base of the hill, thin and clear. It moves around stones with a soft, persistent sound. You crouch and dip your fingers in. The water is cold enough to wake you without shocking you. You splash a little on your wrist and watch it bead and run down your skin. That tiny sensation feels like a handshake with reality. You're here, you are present. The myth is not trapping you. It is accompanying you. Another joke slips in, because your mind is still being kind to you. You think, if your emotional life had a stream like this, it would be clogged with a shopping cart and one mysterious shoe, and yet it would still flow. Humans are messy, and the water still moves. You stand and keep walking, following the stream for a while. The sunlight grows warmer. The birds become slightly more confident, but still polite. Like they're trying not to disturb anyone sleeping. You reach a small grove of trees. Their leaves are thin and bright, fluttering in a breeze that feels like a slow breath. Under the trees, the ground is shaded, cool and calm. The shade is not darkness in the underworld sense. It is the kind of shade that rests you. You sit again, this time on the ground, back against a tree trunk. The bark is rough, and the roughness feels good. It reminds you that the world is textured, real. Now the pacing softens. Words become slower. The air becomes gentler. This is the wind down, the part where you let the story turn into sleep. You close your eyes and imagine the descent myth not as a staircase of fear, but as a staircase of understanding. Each step down is a release. Each step down is an untying. The gates are not enemies. They are simply moments where you put something down. A title, a worry, a need to control, a demand to be seen a certain way. You breathe in slowly through your nose. You breathe out slowly through your mouth. You imagine the underworld, if it exists at all, as a quiet library of endings. Not cruel, not angry, just a place where stories rest. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. And that is okay. You do not have to confirm everything to live. You do not have to solve the universe to deserve rest. Some parts are documented. Some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. Documented is that humans told these stories and carved their symbols and buried their dead with care. Interpretation is that these stories served as maps for emotion and community. Imagination is you. Tonight, feeling a soft door open inside your chest as you accept the pattern. You listen to the stream. You listen to the leaves. You listen to your own breathing. You let your thoughts drift across the familiar human worries, but they do not stick. They float. A message left unanswered. A task unfinished. A conversation you wish went differently. You allow each one to appear and then pass like a leaf moving along water. If your mind tries to grab one and start wrestling it, you gently tell yourself, not now, not tonight. Tonight is for soft understanding, not for winning arguments with the past. You feel your eyelids grow heavier. Your jaw relaxes more. Your shoulders sink into the tree's support, and you imagine, in the calmest way, that every time you exhale, a small symbol slides off you and lands on the ground. Not lost forever, just set down for the night. A necklace of tension, a crown of responsibility, a ring of worry. One by one, they fall away, and you remain, simple and warm and breathing. You might even smile at how dramatic your brain can be while you are literally just trying to sleep. You think you truly are a walking myth factory. But it is okay. A myth factory can also be a lullaby factory. The morning light behind your eyelids turns orange and soft. The stream sounds farther away now, like it is moving into the background of a dream. Your hands feel heavy and peaceful. Your feet feel warm. Your thoughts slow down to the pace of a slow, steady heartbeat. You rest in the knowledge that descent is not the end of the story shape. It is a part of the story shape, a necessary dip that makes the return feel real. And the return, in your own life, can be as small as this moment. Breath returning, calm returning. The sense of being held by something quiet and ordinary. You let your breathing become the only thing you track. In, out, in, out. And as you drift, you do not need to know what is true beyond the edge of life. You only need to know what is true in your body right now. You are safe. You are warm enough. You are allowed to rest. The leaves keep moving, gentle and consistent. The stream keeps flowing, steady and unconcerned. The sky keeps brightening, but it does not demand you wake. You sink into sleep the way a pebble sinks into a riverbed, not with drama, but with certainty, settling into a place that holds you. And the last thought you carry is soft and simple. You can put things down. You can be small. You can be quiet. You can let the story hold you until you do not need it anymore. End of script. Sweet dreams.